everybody's an NPC, nobody stands out because nobody's authentic. That yes, you can work with Shell by posting memes on LinkedIn, see the proof of authenticity that's, on the blockchain, and who gives a fuck?
Good to see you, Diego or Don Borgo. Also, Internet Cowboy. I wondered if you could very quickly tell me a little bit about that kind of like definition you give yourself. I'm curious to know where it comes from, but also like what it evokes, what you hope it evokes in the people that read it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. I'm stoked. We've been in touch for a minute, so I'm excited to get and jump on the mic and and just chat. So stoked to be here. Internet cowboy, I think that's what it is. Like I've been a cowboy my whole life, right? It's just I think it's the old way of saying degen, right? I think degen is the new meta, is the new sort of like Web3 way of like cowboys. But I'm more on that side of like the cowboys, like I've been doing things by my own. I've been exploring, not following the rules and just breaking things, and exploring different ways of doing things. And I think that the internet is just exciting because gets us to be, global cowboys, right? It can be anywhere, it can be everywhere. And especially in Web3, which, I have a newsletter called The Wild West of Web3, which which is basically that, is a fucking Wild West. And with a bunch of cowboys just going around and trying to figure out what's happening. And there are no rules, there's no laws, it's all decentralized, there are rugs and pitfalls everywhere. And
Yeah.
we just sort of like go about and figure it out and build our own thing and find our own treasures and make our own gangs and groups. And that's kind of like the way I love seeing the internet. It's just this wild west.
You appear to be, from the outside looking in, trying to, I'm not going to say create rules, but certainly it would appear you're trying to be like the good guy in the space, the dependable guy, the guy who has done his research and has been around and has spoken to and networked and experienced and seen the pitfalls and seen the rugs and gone through some of the wild west stuff and is out the other side with an ability, I think, to advise and to bring brands into this in a more kind of like intentional way where they can come in and just not look like a cash grab extraction kind of like play. And I'm curious about that. Like, how does within the internet cowboy world, I think it's a brilliant
Mhm.
analogy, by the way, but like how is this influencing your approach to branding and marketing? And what is it that you're trying to personify in this space?
Yeah, it's a good point because if you stick to the analogy of Wild West, you have the guys that are going to be wanted, which are criminals, which there are
Yeah.
shit tons within our industry, and we know a lot of them, and they keep coming back, and everybody keep
Yeah.
forgetting about it, which is crazy.
And then you
And
have
then
the
you have
sheriff.
the sheriffs, right?
Yeah.
The guys that are arresting everybody, like people that are looking to on-chain activity and connecting the dots and
Yeah.
sort of like calling people out and exposing, right? So that's why the cowboy is exciting to me because I'm not on one side, neither the other. I'm doing my own thing, right? I've
Yeah.
I, I've hanged out with the thieves and seeing what they do. I've hanged out with the sheriffs and see how they play, and I just do my own thing.
Yeah.
And I think that the interesting element of that is we're in such an early stage of the upcoming next web, right? Because we keep saying like Web3 is the new internet and all of that, and it's being shaped as we speak. And we are early and we are excited, and that's all what we always talked about, which is true, right? So within that space, there's so many room for you to create your own path, right? There's no
Hmm.
one saying, hey, listen, if you want to build a company, you need to do this, and that. Like, there is none of it, right? It's not
Yeah.
like building a drop shipping company or building an e-commerce platform in web 2 where if you don't do the things everybody does, you won't succeed, right? Because the rule the book is already written, right?
Hmm.
And that's why it's exciting for me in web3 because there are books that are written but then they become useless, right? So if you think about like the cycles, the metas, the narratives, like we call, what works now is not going to work next cycle, right? NFTs for brands and NFTs as an asset class, and people, buy NFTs and trading NFTs, like that's dead, right?
Dead.
At least from
Yeah.
that level, as
Yeah.
we've seen like Bored Ape at 450 grand, right? Like that's not gonna come back, right?
No,
So
no.
that's why I find it exciting, that element of cowboy, because you need to be a cowboy to be in this part of the internet. I keep saying to everybody that I used to work with, whenever I bring them to Telegram or I bring them to Discord, I introduce them to a project, or they jump on a call with a bunch of anons with PFPs up and they're the only ones with the camera on. I just text
Mm-hmm.
them on the side and I say, we run the side of the internet. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're building it and we run it. And that's why for me it's so exciting, like that sort of like cowboy element. Now to your point of the brands,
Yeah.
that's kind of like the space I spent the last 3 years on, right? So for background, I was back on time in May 2021 is when I got into NFTs. I've been blockchain since 2017.
Mm-hmm.
But the NFTs unlocked a really interesting element of it, especially for brands, which is culture, right? I spent my entire career since I was 16 years old when I started an agency, having clients like Samsung, Warner Bros, and Red Bull, where I was playing a role in the middle of a triangle, which is what is upcoming in culture, how does technology influentiate it, and what is the role for brands, right? Back in 2007, when I started, it was esports and gaming. So
Yeah.
now those brands wanted to understand that space, which was super early, right? Games were for nerds were sitting in the basement drinking Monster and Red Bull, and brands started to want to talk to them, which is similar to where we are in Web3, because it's just us, a bunch of nerds talking about the tech and excited about it, right? And the cycle in 2021 with NFTs and all of that was the same, is what is upcoming culture, which were NFTs, it's a new technology, and what is in for brands. So I lean heavily on that, and I'm very grateful to back there. I was part of Adidas in the headquarter working. I've been working with the brand for 4 years as an external partner, advising that in many different things within digital. And
Yeah.
we got a gang, right? We got a gang and built into the metaverse, which we made we made 24 million euros in 24 hours.
Yeah.
Everybody got excited. We partnered with Yuga, we partnered with G Money, we partnered with Pixel Vault, and that was the start of the first Fortune 500 brand to do something in Web3, right?
Yeah.
Like relevant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
the week
And
after
that was
Nike
massive.
came,
That was massive for a
that
moment
was
as well.
massive. Everybody was talking about
Yeah.
it, right? And then the next week, Nike bought Artifact, and everybody
Mm-hmm.
was like, "Holy shit, it's happening!" Right? But
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm saying about the books, because we've written that book with NFT as an asset class. We sold NFTs, we made money out of NFTs as a brand, but then everyone that came after that didn't write a new book. They just kept iterating on that concept of NFTs as an asset class. You sell NFT, you make money, you get money from royalty, and that died, right? So I left Adidas right after we dropped into the metaverse because I knew what would happen, because corporate gets on the way, things gets lower, it's much harder to
Mm-hmm.
deploy. There's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of attention. So I also leveraged the opportunity by going to work with other brands. I work with Salesforce. We did NFT Cloud, integration with Customer 360. We built the whole tech for allowing brands that they work with to issue NFTs at scale. I went on to work with Mastercard, with L'Oreal, with Porsche, with Cupra, with Skoda, with Shell, the energy company, and a bunch of others, right? Trying to get them to see what we have seen, trying to get to them natively to understand how they play a role in the very early stage of the future of the internet, right? And all of that was around NFTs. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like the things I've spent on the last 3 years. But obviously, within this last 6 to 8 months, since that narrative heavily has shifted, I also shifted my focus, and most of the work I do right now is with Web3 founders.
Isn't it interesting that we talk about culture, and at the moment, on this side of the internet, we'll call it that, with these things that you're talking about, and the entry for brands, that the rules that defined brand development and marketing campaigns on the internet for the last, or maybe even beyond the internet, for the past 60, 70 years, were absolutely torn to shreds and ripped out, and everything that you would expect to see, every narrative you would expect to go a particular way, really. And I'll call on Porsche as an example.
Yeah,
Came in, created a campaign was not received particularly well initially. Early sales absolutely bombed. And through that bombing, it gained more attention. So it's like the attention that they hadn't been able to grab at the beginning, they were
yeah,
able to grab by not hitting the mark exactly. But then it took off. And then before you knew it, like sold out, floor price absolutely skyrocketed. That was based on the conversation that was being driven by the participants. as opposed to the narrative, I think, that was being fed by the brand itself. What
100%.
what have you learned about the way brands should be engaging participants in this space? Because to just feed them and expect the return you want, for me, it feels like it doesn't work here anymore. There needs to be a much more weight on the kind of the back and forth and the interaction and the feedback and, you know, showcasing progress and that kind of stuff. Like, what have you seen to that end?
Yeah, and I love that question and where you're coming from, because the best value I can add to this conversation is abstracting the technology, right? So tackling what you just said, it's technology agnostic, right? So it doesn't matter if it's Web 3, Web 2, Web 1, Web 69. It doesn't matter, right? The
Hmm.
technology doesn't matter. So what is exciting here is that culture has shifted in a way that brands have always seen people as consumers, right? And the only role that consumers play is to consume. And to consume, you need to be force fed or spoon fed, whatever you want to say, right? So you're
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
putting down through someone's throat something so they consume,
Hmm.
right? Which is superficial. Superficial is a commercial relationship. It's limited, right? So how do you expand on a consumer relationship? You keep giving shit to people to consume. When they don't want anymore, 20% off. Come, there's no way. Oh, no other day you're gonna get it. The manager goes crazy. Like it's time for you. And then you see Black Fridays, Christmas, Valentine's Day, every single holiday is about like 20, 30, 40, 50% off, right? Because they need to
Hmm.
grow and they don't know what to do because they need to force feed consumers to consume. So that is how brands have been built. That's how products have been sold forever, right? Regardless of the technology.
Yeah.
Now, from a cultural perspective, what's happening, and that has a lot to do with obviously the I said I would abstract the technology, but let's just add internet to it, which is
Hmm.
that it just democratized the access of information and democratized the influence to people. So now everybody has a saying, right? Now we see influencers launching brands, right? And they launch brands and they are huge, like Mr. Beast with the chocolates or with the
Yeah.
burger chain, or Logan Paul with Prime, and many others, right? Like Conor McGregor with whiskey. Like they're literally building multi-million dollars based purely on their platform and their influence, right? And a lot of things, what they're doing is they're just not forcing their consumers to consume; they're bringing them along on the journey,
Yeah.
right? You are part of it. We
That's
build
really
this together. You are not just an audience; you're my community, right?
that's
And that's
it.
what's exciting. And that's what's
That's the
exciting.
word. And they're creating communities around the content that they're building and their lifestyle and the conversation that they've been having. Many of them, if you give Logan Paul as an example, I'm not a big Logan Paul fan,
Well,
but
fuck
I
him.
absolutely I but I absolutely admire his
Yeah,
marketing
you can't deny.
masterclass for the last 12 years. The guy started making vines, 10-second video clips that then moved into YouTube videos. And he nurtured a group of people who now look to him for their information
Yeah,
for whatever reason. And
yeah,
and you know, we can have conversations about the ethical implications of that and then the responsibility that comes with that. But essentially, he's created a drinks brand which, caffeinated is essentially a Red Bull imitation, and non-caffeinated is
Gatorade
a
imitation.
exactly, right? And and but what he's been able to do is he's been able to bring a community with him who want to share in the conversation.
And that's all around like ownership of attention, right? And Logan, KSI, Tate, those people do it really well because people love hating them. And
Mm,
when you hate them, you talk about them and then you give it attention. And there are the other people that love them. So they fight against the haters. And then the whole conversation is built around it. Right. And those
yeah,
guys are really good at that because they're really good at being hated. Right. And they create the angles for that. And that's how they blew up and how they build their brand, which is a really interesting angle.
do,
So all of that is conversion. All what they're doing is conveying that attention and then bringing the community and the diehard fans that are beside them as ways to go to market as well, right? So they're going to market through their communities. They
mm,
are using the influence of their community members to onboard the other people around that. Oh, that's the brand you never tried. You should try it online. So it's kind of like a little bit like a cult, which like everything in the world is a
It,
cult.
it, it is
If
a
you
cult.
start from religion to Bitcoin, everything in between is a cult.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those guys are really good at building cults. That's why they're really good at building brands, because brands are cults. Like,
Do
why do you
you?
pay $450 on a Gucci t-shirt? Right? It's
uh,
because people from the outside are gonna look and see that you can afford a Gucci t-shirt, and you want to show the world that you can, flex that status, and you're part of that cult, right?
mm.
So I think that's a lot around that.
Do you think that's healthy? Do you? So we talk about culture and we talk about people creating cults, and we've spoken about a couple of young men there who I think in some instances some of them are trying to do the right thing and live by a decent code. Some of them I think are intentionally being very antagonistic and creating viewpoints that are contrary to what we've all accepted in society as being okay. I'll use Andrew Tate as an example.
Yeah.
Like his rhetoric is not what the rest of the world would deem as appropriate. But he's able to play this game and use this machine that we talk about, which is the culture of the internet,
Yeah.
to convey his messages and to build a community, a cult, if we want to call it that. Do you think that's healthy? Do you think, do you think freedom of speech says these are if people want to follow this, if people are looking for this outlook, that's okay? Or do you think actually with all of this, there is a requirement for some framework and some rules and some centralization, dare I say it?
Mhm.
So, I'm really curious where you
I
sit
get
on
it.
that because I'm all for decentralization. I'm all
Yeah.
for ownership. I'm all for
Yeah.
self sovereignty. I think it's powerful, but it's
Yeah.
also very, very dangerous. It feels
Yeah.
like.
I'm quite straightforward with that. I'm a simple man, a cowboy from the West, right? So
Mm.
it's simple for me. There's two things that matter. One thing is economics, right?
Yep.
People will The market should regulate itself, right? If people want to give Tate $50 a month to be part of his community because they decided to, it's their choice, right? And if
Sure.
Tate can bring 200, 300,000 people in there, good for him, right? He's built a business. So that's one point. The
Hmm.
second point for me is there's a quote, I think from Voltaire, if I'm not mistaken, that he says, I hate what you have to say, but I will die for you to be able to do it. And I think that's exactly what it's about, right? I think we are going away from that fucking crazy deplatforming and
Yeah.
cancellation culture and all of that, where got us in the troubles that we are currently seeing. And I
Mm.
think that we are sort of like starting to break out of that, right? I think Elon has done the biggest favor to everybody by acquiring X and turning it upside down, and now sort of like rebuilding it and
Yeah.
bringing Tate and Trump and whoever back to the platform again. I don't necessarily support or agree with what they have to say, but I think it's important that they can say what they want to say,
Hmm.
because who sets the line, right?
Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
love thinking as well of that idea of, if what they're saying is out there and they can't, and out of sudden what you can is here, and then in 5 years what you can is here, and then in 10 years what you can say is here, and then in
Hmm.
20 years what you can say is here, there will be a point that we cannot say anything anymore,
Mm.
because maybe what they're saying right now is outrageous for some people, but then they cannot say that, and then out of sudden you
Yeah.
cannot say this, and then who is controlling what can be said and what can't, right? Who decides it? And that's why it's another rabbit hole. But when you start going to the centralization of AI, for example, which is happening right now, it's very dangerous, because you're giving the power of truth to a very single-handed amount of individuals that are deciding what truth is, right? And you and I were born before the AI era, so we know
Hmm.
what truth is because we read fucking books back on the day, right? And we talk to people. But our kids gonna be tapping into ChatGPT something, and whatever it spits out is the truth. And who
Mm.
is deciding the truth, right? So that's kind of like the way I'm looking at that, from multidimensional, adding technology to it, abstracting technology to it. But again, I think that everybody should have the right to say freedom of speech. I think is the cornerstone of our society.
Great answer. And you touch on emerging tech. We've spoken about the progression of the internet. It's absolutely wild that the progression of the internet just so happened to turn a corner at the point that AI technology went from something that you might read a fiction novel about to suddenly being on our doorstep and
Yeah,
influencing the way we work every day. No, there isn't a working day that goes by where I don't use ChatGPT as an aid to the things that I'm trying to create and produce. What do you think the opportunities are for emerging content creators specifically? Or maybe it doesn't have to be specific. For emerging creators or entrepreneurs, what do you think the biggest opportunities are with, using emerging tech right now?
Woo, we can go on hours on that because there's
Yeah,
so many angles, right?
yeah.
I'll stick to creators because I think it's relevant. I think the beauty of what technology has brought to the table from a creator standpoint, and I love to see that almost like a ladder approach, right? If you think about, content creator or creator economy V1, was basically broadcast and TV and radio stations, right? So, how I, as a content creator from Bangladesh, can get to be seen and heard all across the globe, or get to be seen and heard, or add value to niche communities that are, I don't know, in Delaware in the US, right? It was
Mhm, mhm.
impossible. One was impossible because of that. And two, you had like a very clear, middleman or gatekeeper, right?
Sure.
And with that comes the truth, right? So they decide what the truth is, they decide what can be said and what cannot be said, and they decide who should be up and who should be down, right? So many negative implications with this the centralization and the middleman of that as a platform. Then the V2 of that was the internet, social media, and all of the beauty that came with that, right? So what we've done there is that now that guy from Bangladesh can be seen anywhere in the world, right? Create a YouTube channel, start providing value, creating content, and if people like it, and if he's got traction, he's gonna be seen everywhere in the world, right? And everybody's got a mic, everybody's
Mhm,
got a way to share their point of view, and the barrier to entry to enter that is fairly limited, right? It's fairly small. So you need an internet connection. You might need a phone or a camera or microphone, whatever it
mhm,
is.
mhm,
There's different qualities to that, of course, but entry point has become much cheaper. Meaning you're democratizing content creation, you're democratizing people being able to share their points of view. And also you're being able to create micro communities as well, right? Because if you are a person living, in Bangladesh that is super interested in a very specific topic, it's very unlikely that you're going to find people in your neighborhood that are interested in that too. So you are that lonely wolf, right? You're isolated. And Web3 has shown that clearly to us because we say go touch some grass and talk to people, but when we go out there, nobody wants to know about it. Nobody knows anything about it. Nobody wants to hear about it. So
mhm.
that's why we are on Twitter 24 hours, right? Because we
Mm.
found our crew, we found our gang,
Yeah.
and that's what is exciting, right? And now the next version of that for me on content creation is being powered by AI, right? And I think that's the current sort of like evolution for that, and more than just being able to scale your content by tapping some ideas into ChatGPT, getting back content and copy pasta into places, which I think is
Mhm.
very detrimental for
Agreed.
personal brand and content creation, and it's being you know, really bad to see the amount of like bullshit creators that are coming up out of that, literally because anyone can be a creator right now, but it doesn't mean that
Mhm,
everybody should, right?
mhm.
Apart from that, what I think is exciting is what we were talking before, what you were saying before. We can take reels out of this conversation now, which is all AI generated, right?
Yep,
And
yep.
some snippets and parts of it can become a way for me to distribute my content to my audience, and vice versa to yourself. I think that there is it got me to be able to write much better, as a partner, almost like as an assistant. And from a content creation, I think there's many different ways now that you can scale your content, being more platforms, and put the guardrails around it. Because things I've been exploring a lot is how do I train AI with all the content I ever created, and how it helps me to sort of like scale my content without losing tone of
Same.
voice and things like that. So that's where
Yeah.
I think the opportunity is. Instead of you having like 20 people now as a media company trying to build Diego Borgo's brand, now I can do that alone in my basement, right? With
Mhm.
like a fraction of the cost, and and likely a much bigger upside because I have control of what I want to be to be out there. So
Yeah.
that is the tip of the iceberg of what I find exciting, especially when it comes to the creator economy.
I think that's great. I'm currently doing the same thing. I'm going through a process of pulling content that I've written or produced in the past that I'm pleased with, and bringing it into one place and feeding it into an AI and telling the AI other things that I'm interested in and asking for other ideas about how I could create. It's very good for proliferating your
Yeah.
content, I find. I'm also with you that it's very, very dangerous to just ask it for content ideas that you copy pasta, and it's absolute disastrous. You can see it a mile off. That's
Oh,
the thing that
100%.
is
Yeah.
clear. You've got like 46,000, maybe more now, LinkedIn followers, which is
Something like
uh,
that. Yeah.
which is a different platform. It's not a platform that I've had a great deal of success with, probably because it's not a platform that I've been very consistent with. And it's a very, very different place to X, Twitter. What strategies are you using that you find most effective for creating content that resonates with multiple audiences? Or are you creating content for different spaces that's very different?
Yeah. So the only strategy is to be myself, right? The way I am, I talk on X, the way I talk on a podcast, the way I talk on, meeting with Fortune 500 clients in the
Hmm.
boardroom or whatever, the way I talk on LinkedIn is exactly the same, right?
Okay.
And I think that's why I cracked the attention algo on LinkedIn, is because there is a fundamental issue with the platform from a user perspective, from a creator perspective, for a better word. Everybody that is there is looking either for being hired, or they have a business, or they have a job. People are different depending on the platforms they are and the social circumstances they are, right? The way you are with your mates in the pub is very different than the way you talk when you're in a client dinner. I mean, generally, the way you're on TikTok, the way you're on X, and the way you're on LinkedIn is extremely different from each other, right? Is because you're sort of like adapting to that platform. And that's where I think a lot of people fall short, because everybody's just, like the sort of like NPCs on LinkedIn, right? You just have a bunch of NPCs. Oh, like, good work. Hey, great work
Oh
anniversary.
my God, there's
Oh, I
so
want to
much of that.
celebrate my 1 year working for this company that I hate, but hey, I need to talk something good about that on LinkedIn. So you see that left and right, right? So everybody's the same. Everybody's an NPC. Nobody stands out because nobody's authentic. So when I got to the platform back in October 2020, I start looking to how can I, be myself here, regardless of the cost. And how can I afterwards, which obviously was sort of like where I went to, translate the madness from Twitter into LinkedIn when it comes to Web3, right? We talk about all the time about onboarding and bringing the masses, and everybody should be here, and we want to like give the Kool-Aid to everybody, but we keep talking in a way that nobody understands,
Yeah.
right? We keep talking about things that nobody understands.
Hmm.
So my role was, how do I get to translate that to them, make it digestible, but still I'm gonna be myself, right? Because if I won't be myself, what is the point of being a creator, right?
Hmm.
So that's kind of like the way I choose doing it. And back in 2020, you wouldn't see one fifth of the memes that are in the platform. You wouldn't see the hot takes. You wouldn't see a lot of what is becoming either my echo chamber or what the platform has become. Because every time I open the app, what I see is like memes and hot takes and people like being
Yeah.
more, which
Yeah,
is really
like a very controversial or contrary or antagonizing headline that makes you think, and then you click, drop show more, and then a story that gives an angle into that headline. It's become very attention grab, and then divulge like experience or anecdotes, those kind of things, which is
yeah.
very, very different to what it was beforehand. And I think it's an exciting place now. It feels like an exciting place to go and showcase a more authentic self.
Yeah, and like from in our industry specifically, I spend obviously a lot of time on Twitter because that's where like the alpha and the real founders and the really tech intriguing things are. But
Hmm.
honestly, like the quality of conversations, the things I get to learn into, in depth, and the network I build on LinkedIn is 95%. Like I don't even look at my DMs on Twitter because majority of it is scams, right?
Yeah.
And whereas on LinkedIn, I've worked with over 150 companies in this industry already, and all of them came through LinkedIn. right?
Wow.
All the inbound came from through LinkedIn. All the
Yeah.
brand build I've done came through LinkedIn. And the more I dive into the really deep rabbit holes of Web3, and I start talking to people on Telegram, and start making business here and there, it's funny to see that they always mention that they have seen my content, so they are there, right? It's not that they're just on X, but maybe they're not that active, or maybe they still have that feeling of like, oh yeah, LinkedIn is just for boomers and it's very boring and there's nothing there for me. But our community has grown really well there, and there's like quite some smart founders like Lucas himself, that he's there too. He's leveraging it, he's leveraging attention there for
Yeah.
pudgies, and there's I got Zeneca to jump in there as well, and he did a really good run. I think he might just got bored now because he doesn't create as much content as he used to. But I think that there is still a lot of space. I've been trying to get G Money there for a minute,
Hmm.
before he was doxxed, and now he's not. And I'm like, bro, you gotta get in there. So I think it's a good platform for that, because people are in that mindset of business. You get a lot of bullshit. I get pitched like every day. I get 40 to 50 DMs, and a lot of it is people just like pitching services and all of that. At least it's not scams, so or majority of that are not. So
Yeah.
I think it's a really good platform for that. Apart from, if you want to argue like censorship and that being owned by Microsoft, and the way potentially the algo can steer things left and right, and deplatforming and all of that, like it's a whole different world for sure. Is
Yeah.
as Web 2 as it gets.
Do you deploy strategies that are considerate of algorithms on particular platforms? Do you think about algo, and do you adapt your content accordingly?
I wouldn't say I think about the algo per se. I would say I think about what people want to hear from me at that moment in time,
Hmm.
right?
How do you do that?
Which I think, in certain ways I think is related, but I rather think about like when there is some news, or there's something hot, or there's something happening, what is the unique angle that I can provide by being who I am, that people that follow me would like to see, or that I will find exciting.
Do you have a process for doing that? Is there a little strategy that that is very like operational? Is there like a thing you do? Do you get a blank page out? Do what's your process for doing that?
I jump on the back of the horse and just ride away, right? Like that's what a cowboy does. I don't. I'm scrolling through X, and then I've seen, for example, that Doodles has just launched that teaser for their animation film with Pharrell
It's
Williams, blah
great.
blah blah.
Yeah.
Like I go there and give my take, right? Or when Starbucks was super hot with their loyalty program, and everybody was excited, and everybody was saying, "That's it. That's the the power application." I was like, "Hey, listen, I don't think that it is what it is. I think differently." Right. So I just sort of like put my point of view on those things. A lot of memes, I think, like, Elon says, who controls the memes controls the universe.
Yep.
And I built my entire brand on that, because especially on LinkedIn, people were not used to see that. Like I got called so many times. People were like, "Hey, this is not Twitter. This is LinkedIn." I was like, "Yeah, and fuck off, fuck you." Like I'm gonna do whatever you want. Who are you to tell me which content I should create, right? So I think that sort of like, again, is just very personal. I see a lot of people, like there is this great guy, Justin Walsh, on LinkedIn. He's built a massive business on
Mm.
frameworks, content creation,
Yeah, I'm
and
familiar with
and
Justin.
helping people to sort of like break the algo, and break attention with copy and so on. Like, huge kudos to him, right? Like that's how he operates. He built his business and brand on that. He's made millions of that with like delivering against his promise, which is rare with
Yep.
courses and this type of product. So huge respect to him, but it's not for me. Like I wouldn't be able to operate under such a system. Likely my audience would be 3 or 4 times bigger if I would, but it's just not the way I operate. And
Yeah.
that's going back to your point. I don't really care about like the amount of followers and algo. The amount of followers and impressions help me to get my word out at scale, of course, but it's not necessarily like the why I do it. Like I do it because I have fun doing it, and I do it because it's also fun to sort of like be on the other side. People are like, "Oh, I haven't seen anybody doing what you did." Or when I had a PFP, I had a PFP on my LinkedIn back in I think May 2021 or something like that.
Hmm.
And everybody from the space were like hitting me up and saying, "Dude, I wish I could put a PFP up. I wish I could say what you're saying here." because my boss is in the platform, because the company HR is here, they would like bust my balls. So it's really cool to see it. So that's what I find exciting. It's like is instigating people to be themselves. It's like is being that first one that say, hey, listen, that's what happened when you don't give a fuck, right? And
Yeah.
I build my whole brand on that. And and I also demonstrate for others that yes, you can work with shell by posting memes on LinkedIn. And it's exactly what I did, right? Is the entire opposite. Is the one of the most traditional companies in the world, 100 years plus, and I spent 1.5 year with them, helping them with their strategy of building loyalty programs and different things on the back. So I think that's kind of like the thing that a lot of people are afraid, of like being themselves, which then you fall short. If you're not yourself, you're someone else, and someone else is not as valuable as yourself.
I love that. That's a great take. You carry that persona really well, actually, across platform. And you also, it feels like you carry it a lot into the kind of businesses that you invest in or that you advise. And I guess there is a difference, right, between investing in something and then advising for them. Let's focus for a moment on the ones you invest in, if you're okay with that. What do you look for when you're being asked to invest in a startup? Like, what makes a project stand out to you? I mean, you can obviously say like the scale of the opportunity, the propensity for making
Yeah.
cash, and and that's like a prerequisite. What are you looking for when it comes to a startup that you could invest in?
Yeah, I always bet on the jockey, not on the horse. Good example is like 90cc. I invested on 90cc from G Money, right? Like
Yeah,
if there is someone that is gonna do something relevant in Web3 when it comes to fashion and connecting fashion and technology and building a fashion house, luxury brand, Web3 native, blah blah blah, who is gonna be it? It's gonna be G Money.
it's got to be.
So like that's why I invested, right? I just invested in a more like Web 2-ish business, which is called Social Tip, which is basically the founder from Brewdog, James Watt. He basically
Yeah,
built Brewdog, spent 20 years, 15 years in the company, stepped down as a founder, and then founded this company, right? Like the guy literally just built a $2 billion company,
hmm,
and then he could be on the beach hanging out, and now he's building another business. So there is
yeah,
something to it, right? G doesn't have to build a business. He could be on the beach hanging out, but he's there. There's something to it. So I look for that drive beyond the cash flow and like the opportunity of the business, because I'm not very analytical, as you can see. I'm not very kind of like, oh, I look at this and I see business models and I see the opportunity and market, the amount of market share you could get from that. Like, I get it, but I wouldn't love to spend time looking at fucking charts and trying to understand what the
nice.
opportunity is, right? So I look at someone and say, this guy's a killer. Easy is another example. I don't know if you're familiar with the platform.
Yeah, ESSEE.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I
So
know. Yeah,
Voba
yeah.
is the founder. He basically had three exits already successful. I don't know what his age is, but I would say like
He's a young guy.
25.
I've
Right,
met
he's a
him.
young guy,
Yeah,
max,
yeah.
right? And dude, every single time I send him a message on Telegram, there is not 30 seconds that goes by without him answering it,
Mm,
right? And every time I talk to him, he's just sharp, right? So you're like, listen, you sold three companies, you're a young lad. The likelihood of you just being hanging out at the beach is extremely high, and you're not doing it.
absolutely.
And
And he's
you
not.
hear grinding, you hear getting shit from the community, you hear people saying, "Hey, my token is going down," and you probably everybody's just like giving you shit all the time, and you still show up every day.
Yeah.
There is something to it, right? And that's what I bet on. Is very blank, it's very simple, and I think that from my gut, that's what gives me the feeling of like, yeah, like the likelihood of this being successful and bringing returns and yada yada yada. That's why I do it, not because I like giving people money. I obviously
Yeah.
want to make money off those investments, but I think that's kind of like my thesis.
Do you ask or offer always to advise the companies that you invest in? Or do you occasionally invest and sit back and watch and see what happens?
Yeah, usually the conversation starts the other way. The other way, like sometimes they reach out and say, "Hey, listen, we're building this. We'd like you to be part of it." And then I step in and say, "Hey, we'd like to work with you guys." And then I look under the hood, and I'm like, "Okay, that makes tons of sense,
Cool.
right?" And then I double down on that. So another company as well is DJ Distillery, which now I'm much more involved than before. I started as an advisor, got to know Sami, the founder. Again, guy has sold 3, 4 business already,
Yeah.
super sharp, has got bunch of different clubs in the UK, and 10x revenue and things in that nature. He comes from that industry, really sharp, and again, another successful entrepreneur that could be doing something else of his life, but he is there grinding and trying to build the fastest growing distillery in the world. So when he rang me to be an advisor, I took the call, and once I look under the hood, I put my money on it, and I'm heading a brand. We're building a consumer application brand for the masses that's going to be powered by Web3, but we won't say the word, right? We won't be telling people, hey, you can buy your vodka and it's an RWA token that's connected. You can see the proof of authenticity that's on the blockchain, and the nodes all across the world have verified people. Who gives a fuck, right? So
Yeah.
we're building that brand that is going to be the attention we're going to get is going to it's going to be through the brand, right? And people are gonna use our technology as a byproduct of being interested in the brand, and they might not even know they're interacting with it. So those are kind of like the thesis I do, and the process that goes. Usually starts with maybe as an advisor. Sometimes I'm an advisor and I look under the hood. I'm like, oh, this is ugly.
Right.
I wish I wouldn't have agreed with that long vesting, because this is not going anywhere. So it also happens, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I love the fact that this space is generating opportunities for creators and brand builders to become advocates and ambassadors, but also to be like on the cap table to invest.
Yeah,
Like that feels like a more emerging trend. I know that opportunity has always been there for people like, Hollywood superstars could be an ambassador but could also
yeah,
take a cut. And but
yeah,
now it feels much more like that is being distilled at a more granular level, like at a much more accessible level, which I think is super excited. What do you think the big trends are that are going to we've spoken about NFTs and NFTs as an asset class really dying a death, like just a diminishing return because it's just been regurgitated over and over.
yeah.
What do you think the emerging trends are that Web3 and blockchain offer that brands and businesses and creators can start to take advantage of? What do you think's coming through that people should pay attention to?
Yeah, for me, the entire new narrative and new cycle is going to be all around consumer applications, right?
Okay.
Is how is the basic principle of technology, right? How can this make my life better? Is the basic principle, right? How can this solve a problem? So if we go back to that and pack that with brand and an exciting community around, and something fun to be part of, and make people want to be part of it, it's a no-brainer. And that's
Hmm.
and that's why I think this is so exciting. I just seen Moonshot, for example. The guy just launched the app on people being able to buy meme coins with
Yeah,
Apple Pay, right? Like,
I saw that.
that for me is a first step into a consumer application product, right? Literally is meeting customers where they're at, is meeting people where they're at. We
Yeah.
have seen something so fundamental, disruptive with Satoshi's paper back in 2009, that everybody that reads and goes through that and connect the dots is blown away by it. Our whole industry is built on top of that, and
Hmm.
because of it, we are kind of like, we are a cult, right? Web3 is a cult, and because of that, we try to onboard everybody. Right? It's like a cult, or it's like a religion. You're
Come
walking down
join
the street.
us.
Have you ever heard of the word of God? Come, it's the same shit. You go to
Yeah.
dinner. First thing's like, oh, I need to see where blockchain fits into this conversation. I wanted
Right.
to tell those guys like about my NFT. Like, people don't care.
Yeah.
People do not care. They don't want to learn about the technology, right? And that's what is exciting. I think that more we move towards the direction. Like, I've been around for a minute now, and accepting to join the Gen Distillery to head a brand is a major step for me, because I've declined many opportunities before that would consume more of my time. And the motive why I've done is exactly that, right? Like, we're gonna get people to have fun. We're gonna
Mm.
get people to join, communities, groups, get together. We're taking a very different approach when it comes to brand. We are disrupting an entire super traditional cartel-like industry, which is the spirits industry, and we're gonna turn it upside down. So the technology is gonna come along, but it's not gonna be the motive why we're gonna do all of that, right? What we're gonna do all of that with brand, and people are gonna get excited. and then they're going to join our loyalty program, which, by the way, is blockchain based, right? Because it makes
Mhm.
sense, because it's easier to bring partners to it. Open loyalty is a much better way for giving value, providing rewards, and all of those things, and that's kind of like the way I'm looking into that, right? So if there is a bet for me on the sort of like the next cycle or the next things, is that sort of like consumer application, because then everybody wants to be part of it as soon as you got traction.
I love that. And you're right. This notion of like, how does this make my life easier? I feel like that's where we're at now. That's the bit that is now exciting. The moment to jump in early and make millions, generational wealth. Like there are still pockets of that, and there are still believers who are here because that's what they want to do. But actually, if you now really delve into the people who have hung around and continue to like work with developers and build brands around the technology, it's because they want to be disruptive. They want to be disruptive and they want to create a solution that
Yeah.
nobody has been able to crack. And this gives them the opportunity to do it. I think that's mega exciting.
Yeah, and if you look at like DeFi, that's exactly what it was, right? For our industry, right? Out of a sudden, you have all those, Bitcoin millionaires that are sitting on shit tons of Bitcoin. They have nothing to do with it, right? They cannot
Yeah.
go anywhere. They cannot do anything with it, and then they build DeFi. DeFi was built by them, right? They're like, hey, listen, we got so much money now. We cannot do anything with it. What do we do?
Right.
Build an
How
entire
do we play with this
decentralized
stuff?
system on top of it, right? And now we build that system. It's running, it's smooth, it's great, but trading is boring. So what do we
Yeah.
do? Now we start building culture elements, which early stage was NFTs. Start getting people together. We start having fun. We start looking into art. It's kind of like that Maslow pyramid, right? You
Hmm.
cover you cover Bitcoin as the base. You cover
Yeah.
DeFi
Yeah.
as a way to amplify and like trade and be able to move money around. And now we start needing more things that are more meaningful, that are more valuable, right? And
Mm.
and I think we're going more and more towards that direction.
I wonder what the top stone is.
I don't know, dude, but it's beautiful, it's shiny, and it's promising. So stick around.
For real. What advice, very quickly, would you give to a brand or a creator just starting to explore this space? Because there's this old adage that we are so early, and it still feels like we're very early, but there are more people here than there were. And if you come in, there's a lot of noise. Like, where would you start, or where would you advise someone to start?
Yeah, I think there's a sort of like a fork, right? Two different ways. Brands, I would say that the most exciting things right now is looking back into how you can implement this technology into your already existing systems and products and whatever, to get your customers, already existing customers, to do things better, so provide a better experience to them, or provide a way for them to engage with your brand in a more meaningful way. So like the whole brand meta 2021, early 2022 was tapping into the Web3 native audience. Like, people don't care about brands here. How do you leverage that technology in the back to make your already existing customers' life better, easier, faster, better experience, right? I think that's the fundamental principle.
Yeah.
A lot of my friends that are leading still Web3 studios in the largest brands in the world are now doing that strategy. So, they're not going to market with Web3 as a marketing brand or PR play. They're going back to IT, they're going back to, supply chain, and trying to understand how they can apply the technology on those sides of the business. Because
Hmm.
once the guardrails and the railing is in place, because you've done things on that nature, which there's a lot of use case for that for sure,
Yep.
then whenever it's time for them to plug that cultural element, to plug that brand element, to plug that commerce element, everything's going to be compliant already, right? Because you had to go through all those hurdles to make sure you can play with the tech. So that's what I'm seeing. I'll say like with 80% of my friends that are spending time leading those brands into the space, they're all sort of like looking back towards that direction. Vodafone, for example, is a great example. They're connecting the SIM cards from your phone, basically spinning off a wallet out of it.
I
So,
saw that.
in the future, you can be able to give access to, decentralized finance, DeFi, in essence, through a phone number, for example, right? So to get there, you don't need to do marketing, you don't need to do branding. You can solve a huge problem. You can create a big opportunity, right? And that's a way that you can build the rails for the tech. So
That's
that's kind of like the way.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating development, because that is when you have the capacity to onboard billions of people
Yeah.
without even telling them what
It's the
technology they're
Telegram play,
using.
right? Look what Telegram
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, yeah.
Two taps, you have a wallet. And now
I
everybody's
know,
building
man.
games and everything on Telegram. It's bananas. And now you
Yeah,
can stake USDT for like 40% APY on
and
Telegram. Like it's wild. It's wild.
yeah.
It's wild. It's wild. It's wild. So, I think obviously that's a is a great example of this cycle of a proper way of implementing technology where your customers already are at, instead of trying
Yeah.
to bring them to a new platform. They could have built like Telegram is now on chain, is now is
Right. You
encrypted, a
have to go over to
blockchain, blah
this
blah 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 blah,
application.
blah,
Yeah.
right? Nobody
Wouldn't have
cares.
worked.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Go.
that's the brand play. From a creator's play, I mean, I think there's so much room for creators in this industry because, there's so many dorks in our industry. Like it's just insane. Like the amount of people I have to block every day just because I see the level of like it's just criminals. There's so many criminals among us.
Yeah.
And I think if you're an authentic creator out there keen to provide value, there are two people I listen to this industry like without a single doubt, right? One is Zeneca and the other one is G Money, right? And
Hmm.
those are two that one have shown their face, two had show up every day, three don't need to be creating content, right? I'm sure that
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they are financially free in certain ways. Of course, I don't know the details, but I'm assuming. And they show up every day. They're there. They're creating. They're building. They're providing value. They're helping. Every time I've met that in person has been extremely humbling, regardless of their size, regardless of their influence. So there's a lot of room for people to use those two as benchmarks to become someone valuable within the community. We got enough shillers, we got enough alphas, we got enough of that bullshit. So those are
Adding
those are
adding value is the key, right?
is the key, because what happens is whenever your mate that just got onboarded to this asks you who should I follow, and you send them some dorks, what they're gonna do is that they're gonna get burned. They're
Mm.
gonna get burned. They won't come back. And
Yeah.
and all the thing that you promise him, like the fun and it's cool, it's a wild west. You can be like a cowboy. It's the new internet. All that promised land is gone.
Fascinating. I'm going to leave it there, but I would love you to give listeners the opportunity to find out a little bit more about where they can find you, some exciting projects that you're working on. So you have the floor for a few minutes. Let people know where they can find you and if they want to learn more about what you're doing and what you're building.
Yeah, quite simple. If you're on X, my handle is right here. So Don underline Borgo. You can find me there. And if you happen to be on LinkedIn, Diego Borgo is where you can find me. The guy with the pink beanie. You won't miss it. Come for a full day because we have a lot of fun on that side too.
Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know how busy you are. Really, really looking forward to publishing this episode and appreciate everything you had to say today.
Stoked, man. Thanks for having me.